I had hoped that this Thanksgiving would be a fresh start, less stressful, more laughter, until my mom called, saying in a soft voice that she had a slight change in plans. Just a few weeks ago, I was the one who took my dad to his follow-up checkup after his heart surgery. I still remember the feeling of his hand shaking in mine as we walked into the examination room. As we waited for the results, he held my hand and whispered, "I'm always there." Those words warmed my heart all the way home. I thought that maybe this time, my relationship with my parents would begin to heal. The late October afternoon in Albany was just chilly enough for me to cook a pot of apples and cinnamon on the stove. My kitchen smelled like childhood memories, and the weak sunlight streaming through the windows lit up the wooden floor softly. Sophie sat at the corner of the table, coloring a maple leaf with orange crayons, and Owen hummed a song and dumped a box of Legos on the floor as if nothing else mattered. My phone rang as I kneaded dough for the pie crust. "Mom," the screen said. No heart emoji, no loving message, just "Mom." I wiped my hands on my apron and pressed answer. Her voice was still sweet, as if nothing had happened but the mild sunshine and the afternoon tea. "How are you too, honey? Has Sophie had her front tooth pulled yet? And little Owen, is he still dreaming of being a fire engine driver?" I answered as expected, reporting on school, recounting my son's latest silly comment, and trying to keep the conversation within the safe zone. But then my mother changed her tone. Not exactly cold, just a little calculating, like a thin layer of ice under a layer of sugar. "For Thanksgiving this year," she said, "we want to keep it a little simpler. Just adults, you know." I paused. "What do you mean?" I tried to keep the question from showing in my voice. "Everyone is still coming," Mom continued. "Andrew and Tina will bring the boys. But Sophie and Owen, maybe they should stay home this time." She chuckled. "They're a bit rowdy, you know." I tried to keep my voice calm. "They're just kids, Mom. 7 and 4. "Of course, dear. But Andrew's boys are quiet and well-behaved. Sophie is mischievous. And Owen sings all over the house. I just think Father's guests will find it annoying." I bit my lip. Not because of what she said, I was used to it, but because of the way she made it seem like a reasonable request, as if my kids were wooden chairs that didn't match the color of the table. She praised Andrew's son for being very polite, already using a salad fork, and called mine bright, energetic, then passed over the phrase like it was a sugar lollipop. I stood up straight, my hands still covered in flour, and said in a strangely even voice, "If my child is not welcome, then neither am I." She was silent. Not long, but long enough for me to hear her soft breathing through the phone. "Don't overdo it. It's just a meal." And because it's just a meal, I replied, "You can't teach your kids that they're the last choice in the family." My mother sighed. "I see where you're coming from," she said, in a tone that sounded like she was filling out a customer satisfaction survey. Then she hung up. Not even a goodbye. I put the phone down on the table. The scent of apples and cinnamon in the air seemed to lose its warmth. I turned to see Sophie standing in the doorway, a half-painted leaf in her hand, her eyes wide and worried. She didn't ask, but I knew exactly what the look meant. "Will we still be loved, Mom?" Outside, the wind blew hard, blowing the maple leaves that had fallen in the yard. A few of them hit the glass door and fell, light and unstoppable. I suddenly understood that the season had changed long ago, but I refused to admit that the cold was creeping into my house from my own flesh and blood. Ethan waited until the kids were snoring, Sophie sprawled out on her blanket, Owen curled up with his stuffed daughter, before he said, almost in a whisper, "The kids always had a soft spot for Andrew's sons." I stared at the dying embers of the living room fireplace. It's not a weakness, I muttered. It's a spotlight, and the rest of us are supposed to play in the shadows. The words sounded dangerous in the quiet house, like striking a match too close to a fire. I wrapped my scarf tightly around my shoulders and let my mind drift back to last spring, when Sophie's class had a mini rehearsal. She'd practiced her off-key rendition of This Land Is Your Land for weeks, shouting from the back seat until Owen begged her to stop. The night of the recital, she kept scanning the audience for her grandparents, but all she saw was me, Ethan, and a couple of sleepy dads filming on shaky phones. The next week, Mom casually mentioned how well Andrew's older son had done at the regional science fair, and how she and Dad had driven 2 hours to cheer him on. I swallowed that memory, and another one came rushing back, and another, rolling out like mismatched socks from a drawer, my parents promising to attend Sophie's 7th birthday party, then texting that an emergency had come up, Owen's kindergarten art show, where every child had at least one grandparent photographed, except me. Meanwhile, Andrew's kids collected grandparents who had attended school like badges. Ethan pushed a cup of chamomile toward me. "You're allowed to be vulnerable," he said. "You don't have to earn anything." I forced a smile and took a sip. The tea tasted like warm hay, comforting and normal. "Getting hurt is easy," I said. "Years of pretending not to be hurt have worn me out." He leaned back, his hands clasped behind his head, his eyes on the ceiling as if gauging how much room we had for new ideas. "So let's start writing our own traditions. Thanksgiving can be pancakes and pajamas. We can invite the neighbors or not at all. We choose the music, we set the table, we decide who's welcome." The suggestion rippled through the room, landing softly on the couch cushions and the toy-filled rug. I imagined Sophie flipping chocolate chip pancakes while Owen danced to old Motown records, the kitchen steaming with maple syrup and laughter. The image was both wonderful and terrifying, wonderful because it was ours, terrifying because it meant giving up a lifetime of chasing a seat at someone else's table. "I don't know if I'm ready," I admitted. Part of me is still a 7-year-old, practicing perfect posture so Mom won't tell me to hunch over. Ethan's voice was even. "At 7, you deserved better. At 38, so do you." I closed my eyes and let the memories flood back. Elementary school plays where I played a tree and Andrew played George Washington. How Mom clapped the loudest for the father of the country and forgot about the forest. Senior year, when I got into a public university on scholarship and Andrew, who hadn't even applied yet, got a used Honda as a backup. I spent so many vacations believing that if I cooked the right stew, filled everyone's coffee cups, and laughed at every joke, love would flow like gravy. "Mon," Ethan said, using the nickname he reserved for important moments, "we have 2 kids upstairs who think the sun is up because I told them to. We don't need the old spotlight." I opened my laptop, half out of habit, half to check the calendar, which still had Thanksgiving lit up, circled in bold, crimson letters by myself, 6 months ago. The cursor blinked next to a note that said, "Bring Mom's pie plate." I clicked delete. Somewhere between the hiss of the heating vent and the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece, determination rose in my chest. "I will not dance this again," I whispered. The dance adjusted my steps to match theirs, bowing when the song ended, but never hearing applause. Ethan let out a final breath and slid his hand through mine. The room felt different then, like a stage after the curtains had fallen and the house lights had come up, simple, real, waiting to be set for something new. I closed my laptop with a final click, as if to tell the universe that I really meant it. The screen went dark, reflecting the 2 of us, a tired woman wrapped in a wool blanket, and a man who believed that tiredness never meant the end. For the first time all evening, I noticed the faint crackle of ice on the window. A cold draft had seeped in without permission. As soon as I set my laptop down on the coffee table, my phone began to vibrate against the surface, its vibrations vibrating a small Lego model on the rug. My mother's name lit up on the screen, white letters on black glass, steady and persistent. I watched it blink, each blink a small beacon of light to the rocks I had finally decided to sail around. Ethan's eyebrows rose in silent question. I didn't answer. The phone continued to vibrate, echoing off the framed family photos on the wall, some taken by me, most not. I let it ring until the screen went black and the room was silent except for the hum of the fireplace and the steady beat of my heart. Only then was I sure of its beating. Saturdays usually smell like fabric softener and pancake crumbs, but this morning the laundry basket was heavier than usual. I was folding Owen's dinosaur pajamas, Saurian, torn at the knees, when my phone rang to my mother's ringtone, too cheerful for an emergency and too bright for anger. I almost let it go to voicemail, but habit overrode resentment. Your dad's card doesn't work at the grocery store, Mom barked as soon as I answered. No greeting, no breath between syllables. Did you cancel something, Monica? I tucked the phone between my shoulder and ear, smoothing my nightgown along the faded seams. Yes, I did. I took you both off my credit card. I kept my voice calm like Ethan did when the kids spilled juice on his blueprints. Silence. Then a screech like a leaky tire. You can't just do this. I could and I did. But we're buying the essentials, eggs, bread, your dad's heart medicine. The way she emphasized them implied I'd left them on an iceberg. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting my socks fall off my lap. Mom, that card was supposed to be temporary. A safety net while Dad recovered. That was 3 years ago. It's just money, she said, her voice softening as if I'd misunderstood basic math. You make a lot of money. And honestly, after all we've spent raising you. There it was, the oldest receipt in the world. I closed my eyes and pictured Sophie at 7, believing that allowance meant freedom, not leverage. Don't, I warned. Mom continued. We fed you, clothed you, paid for your braces, your piano lessons, and then you dropped out after 6 weeks. I skipped school because my teacher called me clumsy and you agreed. I reminded her, surprised by my own composure. She ignored the roundaboutness. At least keep an activity card so your dad and I don't have to worry at the checkout counter. Downstairs, the faucet squeaked. Ethan was rinsing the grill. Suddenly I wanted to be down there, sniffing syrup instead of feeling this old guilt. If the card gets declined, you still have yours, I said. Then why call Mom? Because it's embarrassing, she snapped. There, I thought. Not difficult, not inconvenient. Just embarrassing. I stared at the pile of baby socks that didn't fit Owen. Tiny relics. Mom, listen. No, listen, she interrupted. You owe us, Monica. Everything you have is because of us. You can't escape that debt. A strange calm settled over me. The eye of a storm I hadn't even noticed was forming. I don't owe you access to my bank account. I don't owe you my child's absence so your dinners would be quieter. I love you, but love isn't a credit line. She took a sharp breath, like someone startled by cold water. You're being ungrateful. Ungrateful, dramatic, sensitive, my lifelong trifecta. The tag is closed, I said, folding the last sleeve of my pajamas with painful care. Like this conversation. Don't you dare hang. Cup. The air in the bedroom was lighter, almost empty. I put my phone on the dresser, turned to look at the mirror, and caught sight of my reflection. My hair was frizzy, my shirt was caked with flour from breakfast, my eyes looked older than 38, but also more alert. Ethan appeared in the doorway, dish towel slung over his shoulder. "Everything okay?" I opened my mouth to reply, but the phone rang again, gliding across the wooden surface like a startled bug. A message preview appeared. "Andrew, Mom's crying." "What did you do?" A laugh escaped me, short, lifeless. "It's starting," I said to Ethan. He stepped forward, wiping his hands. "The parade of sins?" "Front row," I said, waving my phone like a ticket stub. I typed out the message, watching the typing bubbles appear, disappear, and reappear. Andrew was composing his judgment in real time. I pictured him in his renovated kitchen, espresso steaming, the kids quietly building Lego masterpieces while the grandparents beamed. When the bubbles were completely gone, I locked the screen. In the hallway, sunlight slanted through the skylight, catching dust motes in a lazy waltz. I'd been doing that dance for so long, spinning to avoid collisions, gliding to hide bruised toes. But the music was different now, softer, sure, but more steady. I gathered the laundry, walked downstairs, and found Ethan flipping pancakes for no one in particular. Maple syrup warmed on the stove. Its sweetness enveloped me like a promise. I set the basket aside and leaned against his shoulder. "I thought you canceled your love," I muttered. "Really, you just canceled her access." He kissed the roots of my hair, tasting flour and disappointment. "Access revoked," he said softly. "Love? Still limitless." The phone rang again on the counter. This time I didn't look. Outside, a blue crow was scolding something invisible, and Owen's laughter came from the playroom in bright, broken syllables. I picked up on that sound, letting it fill the kitchen until even the buzzing seemed miles away. They always had a special bond with Andrew's boys, Ethan had said earlier, but the words lingered long after he'd gone upstairs with the kids. Now the kitchen was dark except for the glow of the kitchen clock, 9:42 p.m., and the steady hum of the refrigerator. I opened my laptop, flipping through Thanksgiving recipes for 4 in a half-hearted manner, when my phone lit up, bright enough to sting my eyes. "Andrew, can you stop being so dramatic?" "I don't mean what you're saying." I stared at the blue bubble, thumbs up. Dramatic. The same word my mom used when I cried over my broken Barbie ankle at 6, when I asked to change piano teachers at 12, when I told her I was moving in with Ethan after college instead of waiting for a ring. Dramatic, like my emotions were theater and their emotions were real life that I had never practiced enough. I typed again slowly, giving each letter time to cool. "Me," she meant exactly what she said. "My child is not welcome." 3 dots flash. Stop. Flash again. Then, "Andrew," she's stressed. "Dad's medication is expensive. You throwing accusations around isn't helping anyone." I clenched my jaw. Dad's prescriptions cost less per month than their cable plan, a fact I only knew because the charge had shown up on my card more than once. I deleted that response before it could derail the conversation any further. Instead, I tried a different tactic. "Me, Sophie's show was last April." They said yes, promising front row seats. She looked for them in the auditorium when they were at Ryan's science fair. Remember? I could almost hear Andrew shrugging through the phone. His children's accomplishments were like the weather patterns in our family. Sophie's and Owen's were just passing breezes that you only noticed if you were outside. "Andrew, the science fair is a big event. Ryan advanced to regionals. You know how competitive that is." Me, like learning to be brave enough to sing out of tune in front of 200 people. Only one couple can decide which is more important. Silence. The cursor bobbed on the empty sea. I rubbed my temples, thinking of childhood Saturdays when Andrew and I would fight over the last cinnamon roll. Dad always split it in half, the bigger one for Andrew. You're younger. You need less for me. When Andrew dented the family car at 17, Dad called it an honest mistake and paid the deductible without batting an eye. The following summer, I dented our old Honda, mowing lawns for 2 months to fix it while my mother lectured me about responsibility. Andrew, hey, you're always sensible. Mom isn't banning your kids forever. It's just one dinner. Just say you'll come without them and move on. Sensitive. Another museum piece in the family vocabulary. I imagine Sophie being told to stay home while her cousins carve up turkeys in stories she would never participate in. Sensitive, I think, is a reasonable response to being erased. Ethan's footsteps creaked at the top of the stairs. I could imagine him checking on the kids, Owen's blanket kicked off, Sophie drooling on her pillow because she always slept with her mouth open after a day of growth spurts. The quiet upstairs was like a moat separating our small, chaotic kingdom from the marble towers of my parents' expectations. Andrew, do you want Mom's blood pressure to skyrocket? Because that's where this is going. I laughed so short that I almost coughed. Then I typed with steady fingers. Me. Mom's blood pressure is her responsibility. I have to protect my child. ... Then nothing. I waited, phone face down on the table, listening to the refrigerator shut off with a final sigh. When there was no response, I opened the group message labeled Family, the group that had coordinated potlucks and secret Santas, and pressed mute. The relief was instantaneous, like loosening shoes after a wedding reception. Ethan walked in, still wearing his old college t-shirt. I thought you'd wait for tea, he said lightly. He could tell by the look on my face that the conversation was uncomfortable. Andrew, he guessed. I pushed the phone toward him. He read the message, his lips pressed together. You don't have to keep absorbing this, he said. The barrier exists for a reason. I've always believed that boundaries are for people who don't love enough to find compromise. But maybe boundaries are how you prove that you love, by showing your child that love never requires them to shrink back. My thumb hovered over Andrew's contacts. Block this caller? The screen asked politely, as if it didn't understand the weight of the old beats it was about to erase. I tapped yes. Then I did the same for Mom. And Dad. 3 fireworks broke the silence. Ethan exhaled. There are still daisies from before. Not tonight, I said. I don't want to fall asleep feeling like this. He nodded, kissed the top of my head, and left me to the hum of devices and the soft ticking of the clock. I sat for a moment longer, my phone screen black, my laptop running slowly on a recipe for bourbon pecan pie that no one but us had tasted. When I finally shut down the computer, the kitchen was practically dark. I cleared the dishes, washed them quietly, and let the warm water bring me back to the present. Tomorrow, we take the kids to pick out gourds to paint, maybe stop for apple cider donuts at a roadside stand. Another tradition was taking root, one that didn't need permission to grow. I turned off the faucet, and just then, a banging sound came from the front door, and then a second. The mail slot. The hallway light caught a thick, cream-colored envelope on the floor, the corners crisp, the return address stamped in formal serif, Ellison household. Certified mail. My pulse was pounding, but my hand was steady as I slid my finger under the stamp and then paused. Not tonight. Tonight belonged to the silence I had earned. I placed the envelope on the table in the entryway, unopened, and climbed the stairs toward the small, steady breathing of the only audience I needed. The certified envelope sat on my desk all morning, a pale rectangle against the pile of permits and cafeteria reports. I'd planned to tackle it during lunch, but cafeteria duty dragged on. Owen's class discovered that apples explode if you poke enough straw holes in them, and then a first grader threw up next to the recycling bin. By the time the final bell rang, sneakers and backpacks jostling together, the drizzle had tapped the window, steady and patient, as if the sky were whispering, "Open the door." I peeled back the paper and felt the weight of something more than paper. Perfectly squared pages, the weight of math. On top was a cover letter written by, my stomach twisted, an accountant my mother sometimes asked to draft for tax season. I glanced past the polite greeting to the subject line. Child Care Refund Statement. Amount payable, $78,542.10. A line just below the mother's floral stationery font reads, "Please submit within 30 days to avoid further action." Next action. My heart was pounding. I turned the first page and found a table. Hospital delivery fee $1,200. Newborn diapers, year 1, $816. Formula $1,470. Piano lessons, ages 8 to 12, $2,600. Braces $4,820. Second year running shoes $89.99. And so it went: picnic lunches, SAT prep classes, prom dress alterations, not the dress, just the hem, part of my college tuition minus my scholarship. They even billed me for 3 years of Boy Scout registration, noting that cookie sales don't cover the cost. I laughed once, a dry laugh that startled Helen in the doorway. She looked in, the rain speckling her cardigan. "Monica? Is everything okay?" "Accounting error," I said, my voice too shrill. She gave me a nervous smile, the one she gave to kids who lost their homework and then fell asleep. I closed the door to my office and sank into my swivel chair. At the top of each page was Dad's neat signature, Gerald W. Ellison. Below, in smaller print, Barbara J. Ellison, as if Mom needed that extra flourish to emphasize ownership. In the margin next to the piano lessons, someone had written, "Quit after 9 recitals." A note in the school textbook summary read, "Never return biology 101, pay as needed." A joke I once told Ethan backfired like a boomerang. I must have been an expensive disappointment. Back then, he'd laughed and said, "Worth every penny," kissing me, flour-covered and barefoot, in the same school office during a bake sale. Now that joke has a receipt. I feel less like a daughter and more like a defective product whose warranty has expired. My phone rang. Ethan, as if summoned by the tremor in my gut. I put it on speaker so I could keep turning the page. "Are you okay?" he asked. "They listed my childhood in detail," I said, surprised at how calm my voice was. The total was $78,542, and don't forget the 10 cents. 10 cents, he repeated. Thunder whispered somewhere behind the drizzle. Must be the love fee. A sharp, incredulous breath escaped me before I could stop it. It was a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "They say it's fair compensation considering everything we've done for you." He was quiet long enough that I could picture him pinching the bridge of his nose the way he did when kids mixed Play-Doh. "What do you need?" "I need to not feel like a line item." I flipped to the last page, billing instructions, routing numbers, deadlines underlined twice. "I need to know my value is not a spreadsheet." "You were never a spreadsheet," he said, his words soft but firm. "Take it home. We'll file it under fiction." I pictured the metal box in our closet labeled important: birth certificates, taxes, family photos. This package wouldn't be among them. Maybe I'd leave it next to Owen's colored pencil masterpieces, proof that art tells more true stories than ledgers. Knocking on the door, Mrs. Helen handed me another paper coffee cup. I must have looked pale. She pressed the cup into my hand, whispered, "Some numbers don't add up to love," and left before I could answer. I read the receipt from top to bottom, stopping at Thanksgiving turkey, age 17, family sharing. 17, the year I offered to cook the whole meal while Mom bought the Black Friday ad. She accused me of over-seasoning the turkey. Dad suggested that next time I watch Andrew carve it to learn presentation. They charged me $59 for the turkey. A slow heat spread through my chest. Not rage, something calmer, denser. Realizing that I could refuse the math. They could list every diaper, every piano recital program I'd saved in a shoebox, and the total would still be wrong because love can't be billed afterward. Their bill said, "You owe us for existing." My heart replied, "I exist beyond what you've written." Ethan's voice rang out, soft but sure. "Are you there?" "Here I am," I said, surprising myself with my certainty. "And I am bringing home expensive childhood bills." He chuckled, a sound like sunlight breaking through clouds. "We'll pay them in Monopoly, just orange 50s. I ended the call, gathered the pages, stuffed them back into the envelope, and wrote in black Sharpie on the front, "Return to sender. Account closed." Then I stuffed the envelope into my pocket and locked my office, the rain now like a curtain outside. That night, after dinner, dishes, and 2 rounds of Guess the Animal under the duvet, we put the kids to bed. Sophie lingered at the door, holding her flashlight like a microphone. "Mommy," she whispered, as serious as a judge, "does she hate me?" My throat tightened. I knelt down, level with her stern brown eyes. "You're confused," I said slowly, choosing each syllable like stones through water. "But it's about her, not me. Nothing I do can make me unlovable." She studied my face, then nodded as if recording her verdict in invisible ink. "Okay." She turned off the flashlight and went to bed, her confidence intact for tonight. I closed the door, leaned my forehead against the coolwood, and exhaled. Downstairs, Ethan called. "Tea or something stronger?" I thought of the envelope in my tote bag, the jet black letters declaring independence, and replied, "Let's start with tea. The strength will come later." The rain fell on the roof like an accountant adding columns, but inside the house, the math had changed. Now we were balancing our books, and some of the debts were no longer ours. On a gray Saturday afternoon, Ethan started the car and the air conditioner blew warm air onto the windshield. I set the thick envelope on my lap, feeling it like a cold stone, heavy with paperwork, heavier with the sense of separation. The road leading to my parents' house was deserted. The rows of maples and kumquat trees passed by the glass, shimmering like retreating shadows. Ethan quietly intertwined his hand with mine just as the radio played an early Christmas song. I turned it off so that the silence between us wouldn't be filled with the optimistic dingling of bells. The Ellisons' front door appeared, a bed of white chrysanthemums tossed by the wind, damp leaves plastered to the steps. Mom opened the door on the first ring, her perfect cream sweater and pearl necklace in place. She moved slightly to the side, a polite smile framing her face like an old yearbook photo. Inside, Dad stood by the dead fireplace, his hands behind his back, his chin slightly cocked, the look of someone supervising an inventory, not a reunion. I walked in, the faint scent of vanilla candles lingering. Ethan paused at the door, letting me go first. I placed the envelope on the coffee table, neatly, like evidence. "I'm taking this back," I said, keeping my voice even. "We should talk in person, one last time, instead of through a lawyer." Mom sat down on the chair opposite, crossed her legs, and interlaced her fingers. I feel so sad that you mistook our kindness for an attack. She emphasized the words, kindnesses, the pronunciation teacher said. The letter was only a fair way to make up for the sacrifice. I smiled thinly. Fair means sending child support bills with interest? I opened the envelope, pulled out the first sheet, the column of items. Diapers year 1, second grade field trip tuition, senior year track shoes. I flicked the edge of the paper. That whole Thanksgiving when I was 17, Mom charged me $59, remember? Mom pursed her lips. If you don't want to pay right away, we're willing to negotiate. We can split it up, say $10,000 at a time? That would be easier. It sounded like she was suggesting a payment plan for a sofa. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. He let me row, but his encouraging gaze touched the back of my neck for support. I glanced at Dad. He was silent, his eyes on the paper, but his body tensed slightly as I changed my tone. Should we talk about the credit card first? I asked, deliberately addressing him. 3 years of unauthorized use, almost $6,000 in groceries, gas, HD cable. When are you going to add it to the statement? Dad blinked, cleared his throat, but said nothing. The silence was tantamount to agreement that the matter was trivial or worth forgetting. Mom looked up for him. You make it sound like we're scammers. Family members help each other without counting the cost, and now you're locking the card and acting like the victim. Families help each other, I repeated, by demanding money for diapers and forcing their children to send their grandchildren elsewhere for a quiet dinner table. I picked up the stack of papers, held them at eye level, and tore them straight through. The dry sound of tearing paper marked the moment my heart broke free from the paternal illusion. I tore them again into 4 pieces, 6 pieces, the numbers of frogs jumping out of the pond. Mother cried out softly, as if regretting the printing more than the sentiment. Father stepped out of the shadow of the fireplace, his lips thin. He opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. I'll finish. I won't pay a cent, and I won't apologize for stopping. The card is closed, like this conversation. I placed the crumpled paper in Mother's palm. And this is the last time I'll set foot in this house. No one blocked my path when I turned. Ethan opened the door, and the drizzle blew in like a breath of relief. We went down the steps. My shoes sank lightly into the wet leaves. As I buckled my seatbelt, I turned. Dad stood on the porch, the yellow light behind him illuminating his figure, his eyes as cold as a January lake, watching us without blinking. The engine started, the wipers wiping water from the windshield. Ethan held my hand over the gear shift. Are you okay? He asked, his voice drowned out by the rain. I looked at the dark road ahead, the streetlights blurred with water, and my heart felt hollow but light. I'll be fine, I said. Just drive away. And we drove straight into the misty rain, leaving the house behind us shrinking like a postcard sent to the wrong address. Christmas mornings at our house usually begin with the sound of children running, the wheezing coffee maker, and a tug-of-war between cartoons and holiday music over the TV remote. This year there are still footsteps and the smell of coffee, but there's no sense of rushing to get to the car on time or fit into your best outfit for your grandparents' picture. There's just the smell of cinnamon wafting through the house, and Sophie giggling because Owen just put a red M&M right in the middle of her snowman pancakes. I stood by the stove, pouring syrup over the last plate, listening to Ethan whistle, Jingle Bell Rock off-key. We did good this year, he said, pulling a cinnamon strand from my cheek. I nodded. Good not because everything was perfect. Good because it belonged to the 4 of us, whole and complete. After breakfast, the family set up a sorry board game on the living room carpet. Owen insisted on moving his pieces along a shortcut he had devised, and Sophie counted the squares loudly, laughing every time she said sorry. The Christmas tree by the window twinkled in the winter sun. As I put the pieces back in their boxes, I suddenly remembered what I had said to Ethan last December. Maybe I should start my own Christmas tradition. It turns out that maybe has become now. Around 10, as the kids were unwrapping the last of their presents, just a set of face paint and a box of blocks, the doorbell rang. The sound was so loud in the quiet, it made everyone stop. I looked at Ethan. He shrugged. I'm not seeing anyone. I grabbed the doorknob, my heart racing like a beater. On the porch sat my parents in immaculate beige coats, their gray wool scarves unstained by last night's rain. Between them was a huge gift box, red wrapping paper, gold bows glittering. Mom smiled thinly. Let's leave this small matter alone, shall we, dear? We brought you a present. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me so the children couldn't hear the conversation. The pine, cinnamon scent inside was cut abruptly by the familiar, cool scent of my mother's perfume. I caught my father's eye, hesitant for a split second, then resolute. I can't accept, I said, my voice soft but clear. Mom raised an eyebrow. Don't do this, for the children's sake. Her voice dropped to the familiar soft note of reprimand, as if I were inadvertently ruining my own children's holiday. I took a deep breath, remembering the counselor's advice that conditional love is not a gift, but a string. I was thinking about them, I said. I don't want them to learn that a big gift can mask a bigger hurt. Mom opened her mouth, about to say something more. Dad put a hand on her arm. He looked at me. We just want our family to be together. His voice was less harsh than usual, but there was still an unspoken demand in his eyes. Give us a beautiful way out. I shook my head slowly. Reunions don't start with lining up kids and grandkids outside the door and bringing them sweet treats. I tried to keep the words from shaking. A cold wind whipped across the porch, dry pine needles rustling under my feet. You will regret it, she let go, holding the gift close to her chest, like a ribboned shield. Regret, I repeated, is letting my children believe they have to be as good as their grandchildren to be worthy of a place at the dinner table. I grabbed the doorknob. Merry Christmas, Mom and Dad. I closed the door softly but did not lock it. Through the frosted glass, I saw my mother turn first, her hand still holding the gift box. My father walked more slowly, looking back at my house, whether with regret or anger. I did not know. The moment lasted exactly one heartbeat and then passed, like snow melting on a fireplace ledge. I turned back to find Ethan squatting down to tie Sophie's dress. Both of them were looking at me, waiting for a signal. I smiled, inhaling the scent of butter still lingering in the air. Who wants hot cocoa? The excitement exploded into cheers. No one asked who had rung the bell, and I was even more certain that I had set the right boundaries this time. Late at night, as the whole family huddled on the sofa watching the Polar Express, my phone vibrated. Andrew on the screen. The profile picture was of him and his wife in front of a giant Christmas tree at the mall. They're meeting with a lawyer, I texted. Mom says you left them no choice. No more anger, just a cold wisp of smoke that squirted across my chest and dissipated. I turned off the screen, pulled the covers over Sophie's legs, and sipped my cold cocoa. On the TV, the snow train raced into the night, a journey that only begins when one exchanges tickets for what one believes. The words grandparental rights crept into my head like a lost bee, buzzing around for a place to land just as I was putting cookies on my plate. The only time I heard Dad mention the phrase was last summer, when he was arguing with his neighbor Ray about hedge trimming. Dad blurted out, "Even grandchildren can be sued, let alone a few branches of ivy." At that time, I waved my hand, thinking he was joking. Now, on New Year's Eve, twinkling outside the window, the bee suddenly flew back, chirping like an alarm bell. A pot of chocolate was bubbling on the stove. The living room was lit with warm yellow lights, and Sophie and Owen ran upstairs to choose songs for the midnight countdown. Ethan set out the cheese plate, whistling a jazz improvisation and glancing at me. "What else do we need?" I was about to reply everything when the porch light blinked twice, a sensor indicating presence. The knock came, steady and firm, not like an early visit from a neighbor. I put down the pot and wiped my hands on my apron. Through the glass, snow was falling as thinly as powdered sugar, and in the white curtains stood my parents, in dark coats, their shoulders rounded with cold. Behind them, Andrew and Tina stood close together, covering a thick bag of documents. I opened the door just enough to keep the wind from blowing in. "Happy New Year in advance," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Mom got straight to the point, no questions asked. "We brought some papers you need to see." She held out a bound stack of prints. At the top of the page, "Petition to enforce grandparental rights, New York State Family Law." I didn't touch it. Dad adjusted his glasses, his voice hoarse but clear. "We were cut off unfairly. The law allows grandparents to see their grandchildren if it's in their best interests." I chuckled. "Benefits? You call cutting Sophie and Owen out of Thanksgiving a benefit?" Andrew interjected, holding up a briefcase. "You're overreacting. The lawyer said that as long as we agree on a visitation schedule, no one wants to sue." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Here are my terms." I pulled out my phone and swiped through a few pages. A photo of a credit card bill, a parenting statement, and a text from my mom complaining that my grandchild was too noisy. I zoomed in on the text. "It's just money I owe my parents." The screen light reflected on Mother's eyes. "Are you threatening me?" Andrew frowned. "No. I'll announce it." I held the phone higher, my voice low but firm. "If you and Mom and Dad decide to take legal action, I'll post this publicly, church, relatives, neighborhood Facebook. Everyone will read it and see whose interests it really is." Tina tugged on Andrew's sleeve, but he pulled away. Mom took a breath. "You made it this far just because of a little hurt ego?" My heart was strangely calm. That little self is the value of you and the 2 children. From now on, this house will sign no agreements other than peace. Whoever steps out on the porch tonight must ask themselves if they want the children to be happy or if they just want to win. Dad pursed his lips, looked at the snow-covered steps, then at me, as if weighing whether another step was worth it. Finally, he folded the stack of papers and thrust them into Andrew's hand. Mom mumbled, "Don't forget what you said today." "Of course," I replied. "A copy will sit in the clouds in case the court needs it." I backed into the house. "Good night." The door closed, muffling any murmurs. I leaned against the wood, feeling the cold recede from my skin. Ethan put his hand on my shoulder. "I was going to the lake to get some fresh air. I should be fine now." He smiled half-heartedly. I exhaled, feeling my lungs expand. "I think that was the last drop," I said, looking into his face, and he nodded slowly in complete agreement. Upstairs, Sophie played Auld Lang Syne, and the music and laughter echoed down the stairs. I pulled Ethan into the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of sparkling cider. The clock on the wall crept closer to midnight. Outside, the snow was still falling, but inside, we had drawn a clear line, where true love ended and false demands began. 3 weeks of complete silence. No sudden phone calls, no midnight messages of reproach, no emails reminding me of my debt to my parents. I thought I would be waiting for the familiar vibration, like a coffee addict waiting for the smell of roasting coffee in the morning. But no, there was only silence seeping into my skin. And strangely, I wasn't afraid. I even felt like my lungs could hold more air than before. In mid-January, the snow on the roof began to melt into drops, pattering into the gutters. The house, after months of huddled against the storm of words, suddenly felt lighter. I decided to clean out the photo cabinet next to the stairs. In the largest silver frame was a picture of Thanksgiving when I was 18, Andrew carving the turkey, me standing on the edge, my smile crooked as if pasted on. I took off the glasses, took off the photo, and replaced it with Sophie's drawing of a family of 4, us holding hands under a slightly distorted rainbow. The crayon was smeared, but bright. Owen helped by pasting dinosaur stickers onto the wooden frame. So everyone who passes by will see that our family has dinosaurs guarding it, he explained. The protective meaning was silly but heartwarming. I hung it back up, feeling the heavy wall drop into a secret unit. In the backyard, Ethan and the kids were busy building a pine bird feeder. Sophie painted it green. Owen dipped his brush in red, blotching it into an unfamiliar brown. Ethan drilled holes and screwed them in, so they could hang a sign that read "Happy Bird" in. That afternoon, we poured sunflower seeds, then sat on the steps, counting the furry brown sparrows that landed. Owen shouted first and clapped his hands, stirring up flying snow, and I laughed, a full, throaty laugh, not just a lip-splitting laugh. That night, I slept for 5 hours straight without waking up to imaginary noises. In the morning, I made coffee and a luxury, sketched a few pencil lines, the outline of a bird feeder, the slight curve of Ethan's back as he bent down to tie his shoelaces. My rusty hand, which had been holding the pen for a long time, trembled but was eager. I had forgotten that I liked to draw. One evening, the phone rang with a voicemail from Aunt Carol. She was on Mom's side of the family and rarely called. I listened halfway through. Mom is very sad. The family should let it go. Auntie can be a bridge. I pressed pause, then deleted, without hesitation. My heart didn't ache. There was just a sense of neatness, like pulling the last loose thread from a shirt. The following Wednesday, the sky was clear and the snow was light. As I finished checking the attendance records in the school office, the principal knocked on the door. "Monica, we'd like to invite you to speak at next month's Family Values Week. A short talk on how to build healthy boundaries." I blinked, my back tensing slightly. I'd avoided such forums before. I feared speaking out would expose the chaos in my home. But now, chaos no longer had the power to shape my voice. "I'll think about it," I said, and then noticed the excitement in my voice. When the principal left, I sat and watched the sunlight stream through the windowsill. Dust was sparkling, like the glitter Sophie had accidentally sprinkled on the day of the card. I wondered, if I were to tell a story, where would I begin? Perhaps this very morning, when 3 weeks of silence had proven that silence was not a lack, but a fertile ground for new things to grow. I closed my laptop and stood up. Outside, the last of the snow had melted, revealing patches of yellow grass, the first sign of the coming season, though it was still far away. When Principal Franklin knocked on his office door and poked his head in, I was busy updating my grade book on the new data portal. He smiled. "Monica, you know what boundaries are better than anyone. Family Values Week is coming up. Are you ready to share?" I paused. During my 7 years as a manager, I had quietly handled paperwork, budgets, and occasionally hosted a cake fair. And standing on a wooden platform in the gym, in front of hundreds of students and parents, I often used the excuse of being busy with logistics. "I think you have a story to tell," he added, his tone gentle but leaving no room for retreat. I told him I needed a day to think about it, but as I closed my laptop that night, I quickly typed out my acceptance email. My heart was pounding, a mixture of fear and excitement, like the feeling before a cross-country run in high school. At the end of January, the gym hung a colorful banner, Family Values Week, where love meets respect. The students sat on a V-shaped carpet, with chairs neatly arranged for parents at the end. I stood in the wings, my hands freezing despite the heater running at full blast. Ethan texted, "I'll be fine. Just tell the truth." My name was announced, and there was a soft clapping sound. I stepped out, my breath like smoke in the fluorescent lights. "Hello, students, parents, colleagues," I began, my voice shaky but clear. "I come here not as the perfect mother. I never remember the rules of sorting my trash at the end of the week, but as the daughter who once thought love had to be paid in installments." A few teachers nodded. The students watched, curious. I'll keep it brief, not shaming the family, just talking about the feeling of having to please to be accepted. Sometimes we try to give someone else our extra hot chocolate, hoping they'll invite us to the table. But that table is built on conditions, and conditions are often bumpy. Then I took the chalk and drew 3 overlapping circles on the whiteboard: family, self, peace. If you want the peace part to grow, the other 2 circles must appreciate each other. I shared the moment I said no to Thanksgiving dinner without my grandchild, and it taught my child that value is not in the priority seat. Choosing peace, I concluded, sometimes means saying no to people who say no. And the greatest courage is keeping your heart soft when the door is firmly closed. I finished, expecting scattered applause. But the whole room stood up, the sound echoing off the brick walls. I bowed my head slightly, surprised. A young teacher from the fine arts department approached, her eyes moist. "Thank you. I am also learning to set boundaries with my parents without feeling guilty." I took her hand, feeling the relief in her squeeze. As the crowd parted, a couple in their mid-60s approached. He leaned on a cane. She wore a pink velvet shawl. "We are grandparents of a 3rd grader," she said. "What you just said took a lot of courage. Thank you for reminding us that love requires respect." I heard the word grandparents and felt no chill, just a softening in my heart, like snow melting on a warm shovel. In the evening, a thin layer of snow covered the parking lot in a creamy white strip. I drove home, the radio playing an old country tune that couldn't drown out the excited pounding in my chest. When I got home, the kitchen light was shining out the window. Ethan was greasing a pan. Sophie was in an apron mixing cupcake batter. Owen was wearing a paper hat like a French chef. I took off my shoes and stepped into the scent of cocoa. Ethan pointed to the envelope on the table. City postmark, subject line Holbrook and Reed Law Office. Below, my parents' names were italicized. I touched the edge of the paper. My heart did not panic, but tightened like a loose number 6 string tuned to just the right tension. "This letter will come later," I said, lowering my hand and turning to help Owen spread the colored sugar. That evening, when the kitchen was lit only by the cupboard light, I took the envelope upstairs. But instead of opening it, I placed it beside the easel, where the birdcage sketch was waiting to be colored, and said to myself, boundaries are not just drawn with words. Sometimes it is choosing when to open or put aside a letter. In early February, the sun was setting, and the living room was left with only the embers of the fireplace, glowing red from the unburned wood. The crackling sound mingled with the sound of Sophie's pencils scribbling at the dining table while Owen lay on the railroad track rug. Ethan walked in, a thick envelope in his hand, his expression half relieved, half wary. "Holbrook and Reed," he said, setting it down on the coffee table. They said, "Your parents have reconsidered. They're offering to drop everything, the bills, the lawsuit, but they want a word with the kids. Private, no siblings." I held the envelope, feeling the cold paper. My mind immediately flashed to a diary entry I had written many years ago. If one day they say, "Sorry, will I really believe it?" It turns out the question is not old, just dormant. I opened the letter. First line, "We regret if some past actions have caused misunderstanding." I paused at 2 words "if" and misread. A partial apology, no responsible subject. The next page listed visitation conditions, no recording, no arguing, no mention of credit cards. I frowned. The terms read more like a rental agreement than a desire to see my grandchild. Ethan waited for me to finish reading, then asked quietly, "What do you think?" I answered truthfully, "It's like a wall painted a different color, still the same old wall." That night, while the children slept, we sat by the fireplace, our cocoa steaming. I made a column of pros and cons in my notebook. Advantages: children can meet grandparents, ending stress. Disadvantages: condition of no remorse, risk of relapse into emotional control. I must break the boundary I just set up. Ethan added a small box to the disadvantages section. Gut feeling. He said it was an engineering rule. The specs had to include invisible signals. My signal said, "Danger." The next morning, I made a quick Zoom appointment with Dr. Hartley, the therapist I'd been seeing since Thanksgiving. She cocked her head and asked, "What are your boundaries?" I said, "Your self-respect." She smiled gently, so the next question is, did the visit serve or erode them? It didn't take me 10 seconds to see Sophie's painting of a family of 4 on the wall and answer, eroding. At noon, I turned on my laptop and wrote a response. At first, I wrote a long letter, listing the reasons, quoting text messages, scanning invoices. I planned to attach a picture of the bird feeder with a sarcastic caption, "This is unconditional care." But the more I type, the darker the words become. I'm putting the stone back on my back. I took a deep breath, highlighted everything, and pressed delete. The screen was white as new snow. I typed, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ellison, I appreciate your suggestion. However, our small family will still maintain the boundaries we have set. No visiting. No hidden conditions. I wish you peace and happiness." I signed my name, leaving out the "sincerely" at the end. The keyboard was silent as I hovered over the send button. But instead of clicking, I thought of yesterday's fragile ray of sunlight illuminating the melting snow. Forgiveness, I realized, was choosing not to be trapped by resentment. Reaching out was another matter. I closed the computer and pulled out a simple handwritten note. No visits. Borders remain intact. Good health. I signed it, put it in a small envelope, and affixed a stamp. Then I stood up and went out onto the porch. Snow was lightly crunching under my slippers. I dropped the letter into the box and heard the metal lid click shut. The sound echoed throughout the afternoon, warmer than fire. "Do you feel lighter?" Ethan asked that night. I nodded, holding my new sketchbook, a drawing of Sophie smiling, her hair in waves. Forgiveness is not forgetting, nor is it opening a back door to the past. Forgiveness is just dropping the punching bag and moving on. As for the road, I chose to pave it with the respect I owed myself for so long. Sophie appeared at the bedroom door at dawn, still misty with dew. She wore a haphazardly cut paper crown, her eyes sparkling. "Do you know what I want for my birthday?" I nodded sleepily. Sophie held up 2 fingers as if to make a secret wish. Pancakes. And no one crying. The word struck a chord with an old memory. On my 8th birthday, I waited for the strawberry cake my mother had promised to make, but ended up with a melted vanilla ice cream because she was busy entertaining my father's guests. I tried to swallow it, afraid that expressing my disappointment would ruin the dinner. Thinking about it, I jumped out of bed. This year would be different. Backyard, early spring morning. The air was still cool, but the grass was green. Ethan had hung the handmade streamers Sophie had cut the night before. Owen had drawn colorful circles around the table with colored chalk. The pancakes had been baked ahead of time, keeping warm in the oven. Beside them were a pitcher of maple syrup, a bowl of fresh strawberries, and a jar of rainbow sprinkles, sweet fireworks, Sophie called them. The guests were limited to a few neighbors and 3 of Sophie's best friends. No shortage of gifts, but plenty of smiles. Kids huddled around the homemade camp stove, flipping pancakes. Their giggles wafted up along with the smell of ripe avocados, waking up the sparrows that had just made a nest in the bird feeder. I sat down on a folding chair, cup of cocoa in hand, watching the scene without feeling the familiar pounding of my heart when I held a party under my mother's smiling eyes. No need to worry about the cake burning the edges. No one was judging the way I tied the gift bows. Instead, my neighbor Brenda patted me on the shoulder. Your children spread love. The space spreads it too. I smiled, not hiding my emotions. When the candles are out. The pancakes were stacked, and Sophie stuck in 6 star-shaped candles, one representing an extra year because you were so brave, as she put it. Everyone sang a distorted version of Happy Birthday, Sophie blowing out air, Owen cheering at the flying sprinkles. Presents. Tiny packages wrapped in colored newspaper. Sophie opened the last box, a tiny wooden box, a silver pendant peeking out from the leather cord. I had made it myself. 2 hand-carved monograms, only. Sophie touched it lightly, her lips pursed with emotion. Our signature necklace, I smiled. To remind me of my brother and my mother. She put the necklace around her neck, gave it a squeeze, and hugged me, her cheeks still caked with powdered sugar. I inhaled the scent of baby hair and butter, the scent of happiness without worry. In that moment, I saw clearly the line drawn. Love without conditions, joy without control. Sunset, after party. The guests had all gone, and the paper flags were swaying in the honey-colored afternoon sun. Ethan and I gathered cups, and Sophie and Owen scrambled to sweep away the leftover chalk into a fake sunset. Each gust of wind carried the dampness of fresh earth, a reminder that the snow was far away. Night fell. The house was quiet. Ethan bathed the kids. I cleaned the kitchen. The phone lit up, an anonymous number. The message was just a photo of my parents' porch. The tiled steps were spotless, and in the middle was a square gift box wrapped in silver foil and with a blue bow. On the bow was a note. For the kids, no signature, no explanation. My heart sank slowly. Not with fear, just an invisible cold wind through the closed window. I set the phone face down on the table and took a deep breath. Sophie's string glinted in the kitchen light, reminding me, some gifts are not meant to be opened, but to be realized you don't need. I looked up as Ethan walked in, his hair still wet, and asked softly, "Are you okay?" "Spring is coming," I replied. "I'll let everything melt in time." The silver box with the blue bow sat neatly on the porch for 3 days. The spring breeze blew through, carrying pollen that lightly dusted the paper, but the bow remained firm, as if bound by some glue called remorse. I passed it in the morning on my way to work and in the afternoon to pick up my son, trying to convince myself that the slower I opened it, the less of a disturbance it would cause. On the 3rd afternoon, Owen pressed his nose against the glass door and asked innocently, "Mom, can we open it?" The words, "they will send something. Sin always finds a way," the line I'd snickered at Ethan on Christmas, replayed in my head. I breathed in the cool, magnolia-scented air and nodded. "Okay, but Mom will open it first." The light on the porch flashing at the end of the day. The sun set behind the neighbor's roof, leaving a pale orange streak. The porch light flickered twice, probably loose in the midday wind. I carried the box into the kitchen. Sophie and Owen clung to me like curious cats. Ethan stood behind me, wiping his hands on a towel, his eyes questioning, "Are you okay?" I cut the bow, slowly undoing the tape. The paper was revealed. Inside was a remote-controlled toy truck, a set of glittery crayons, and a musical ice skating doll. Also inside was a white card printed with "From Grandma and Grandpa, with love." I left it unopened, just left it on the wrapping paper. The two kids cheered. Owen hugged the truck. Sophie spun her pencil case under the lamp, the glitter reflecting off the ceiling. I put my hand on her shoulder, gently but firmly. "We say thank you, but not everything that comes in means we agree, okay?" Sophie frowned. "What does that mean, Mom?" "It means that gifts can be kept, but the important decision is still made by the family, not by someone giving a nice toy." She nodded, continuing to draw imaginary circles. I saw a spark of recognition in her eyes, not fear, nor guilt. The explanation was as short as a door latch, but it fit. Response compiled but not sent yet. After the kids were enamored with the new dish, Ethan suggested, "We should respond, at least politely, so they don't turn this into ungrateful children." He sat at his laptop and typed, "Thank you for the gift. The children appreciate it. For now, we will stick to our decision on visitation boundaries." He rotated the screen for me to see. "Frank, not harsh." I read, feeling a little shaken. "Polite, yes." But I suddenly felt like I was pulling the string that connected my home to the thing I was trying to cut. Parents sending gifts, waiting for a response to hold the string. If I responded, the string would tighten. I touched the keyboard. The cursor blinked. 1 beat, 2 beats. Then I highlighted the entire line, pressed delete. "You deleted it?" Ethan asked, without reproach. "Some things don't require a response. Like I don't talk to insurance phone robots." He looked at me for a long moment and then nodded, respecting my new silence like a porch without a gift wrap. The unread card. When the house was dark and the children were asleep, I took the card to my room. The envelope was printed with my mother's neat handwriting. For the kids. Undated, unsigned. I didn't open it. I put it in my nightstand, next to the blank blue-covered journal where I planned to write new memories, ones that didn't contain receipts or vague apologies. I closed the drawer. The small, tight click of wood seemed to confirm that the gift had ended there. Outside, the spring wind blew through the treetops, carrying the smell of damp earth and a whisper. Not every closed door leads to darkness. Sometimes, it's just a way to keep the light in. The kitchen at night has its own quietness. The refrigerator hums softly. The yellow light shines on the wooden table with worn knife marks, and the smell of leftover cocoa from a late-night snack lingers in the air. I sit alone. In front of me is the green-covered notebook that has been with me since college. The first pages are filled with biology notes, followed by a few awkward lines of poetry, then many blank pages, blank spaces I have never filled because I am busy, living to please someone. I turn the page. My left hand was shaking slightly, but my right hand held the pen firmly as if I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Dear Mom and Dad. Once my parents asked me why I was cold. Let me answer with the warmth that they had never seen. I paused, a little surprised by the gentler tone than the harsher one. Perhaps it was because when you decided not to send it, you allowed yourself to be more honest. I continued, my pen flowing like a stream that had been opened. I remember the winter when I was 10 years old. I had a cold, and my mother was wrapping year-end gifts for customers. She put her hand on my forehead and said, "No high fever, take your medicine and go to sleep." But when she turned away, she sneezed from exhaustion. I realized she was also in pain, and for the first time, I saw the blurriness behind her lipstick. I remember Dad taking Andrew to the lab late at night, showing him the 3D printed frame while I sat on the plastic chair counting the minutes. Dad stroked my hair, said, "Good girls can wait," and continued to explain the material codes. I was good, but I also felt like a light bulb that hadn't been plugged in yet. I write without anger, just meticulously piecing together forgotten memories. The next paragraph talks about the feeding bill. When my parents sent me numbers, I wasn't angry about the money. I was angry that I was being valued in numbers, like end-of-season sale labels. But I also understood, someone only asks for a debt when they believe they're short. My parents were short on love, so they counted in dollars. Then I acknowledged the moments they tried. I know that Dad woke up early and drove 3 hours to see my 10th grade race, even though all he said at the end was, "Try harder next time." I know that Mom spent 2 hours sewing my prom dress by hand because the sewing machine jammed. The stitches were awkward, but I wore it and felt beautiful. What hurts me is not the lack of love, but the conditional love. When I do things right for my parents, love flows like a stream. When I am slightly out of sync, the tap is turned off. The page was almost full. I went to the last line. Today, I don't write to demand a perfect apology. I know you're not good at that language. I forgive, but forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. I choose peace, not reunion at all costs. I hope you find your own peace where you don't need me to make amends. I signed, resting my pen on the spine of the notebook. In the dying fireplace, the gray ashes gathered into fragile petals. I tore the letter open, folded it into 3, and stepped out onto the back porch. The early spring breeze was gentle, the smell of damp earth after rain wafted in the air. I placed the paper in a small porcelain bowl, struck a match. The blue-orange flame licked the edge of the letter, the word beloved blurred first, then the edge of the paper curled into a wilted flower. The ashes swirled, dissipating into the darkness like a message in smoke. I sat leaning against the railing, the cold seeping through my collar, but my heart strangely warm like a wound that had to be cut open to stop festering. Finishing the unsent letter, I felt I owed no reply. The next morning, the early spring sun crept through the curtains. Sophie pushed open the door, holding a large sheet of drawing paper. "Look, Mom," she smiled. On the paper, 4 crayon figures stood holding hands under a sunny sky. In the corner was a bird feeder and 2 sparrows. Above it, Sophie had scrawled, "Happy family, no conditions." I held my baby, listening to the sound of its tiny heartbeat matching mine. Outside, the leafless maple trees were sprouting green buds. Spring had come, regardless of who held on or let go. The elementary school held its spring fair in late April, when the boxwood trees in the yard were just beginning to sprout bright green buds. Balloons were hung in the playground, and classrooms were open for parents to visit the children's projects. What worried me most was not the waffle stand. It was the kindergarten display of Family Tree Fair. For years, the word family tree had made my stomach churn. I was used to seeing children hesitantly explain why their maternal grandparents' branches were empty. But the old fear had strangely disappeared today when Owen pulled me into the classroom. He pointed happily at the cardboard stuck to the wall, covered with green paper flowers. In the middle was a brown tree stump with 4 branches. Each branch had a photo printed on A4 paper, one of me holding a jar of cake flour, one of Ethan laughing loudly in front of the barbecue, Sophie holding a drawing board, and Owen wearing a paper hat. At the base, he had scribbled, "Family tree, just us, it's enough." Owen spread his arms and presented with great pride. "This is me, Sophie, Monica, and Ethan. That's enough." The last 3 words, accompanied by a bright smile, made my friends burst out in response. No one asked, "Where are your grandparents?" In that moment, I realized that the lack of people is sometimes only as big as my own shadow of doubt, and the children do not have a yardstick to measure it. A parent standing nearby, Amy, whose child sat at Owen's table, glanced at the 4-picture tree with a look of surprise. But when she caught sight of me, she just smiled politely without probing. I responded with a calm nod. I no longer felt the need to make excuses as before. I simply thought, each family is its own map, and strangers don't need detailed directions. As the stream of people slowly passed the project boards, the homeroom teacher, a young Miss Jenkins with a bow in her hair, approached. She spoke softly, just enough for me to hear. "Thank you for allowing Owen to share his family tree in his own way." With more examples like this, many other children will feel more comfortable with the small house model. I was really touched. Before, I always felt guilty that cutting off a toxic branch meant cutting off a piece of history that I needed to know. It turns out that a healthy tree does not necessarily have all its rings. What matters is that its roots are deep and its leaves are green. After the tour, Owen dragged me to the stadium to play beanbag toss. I helped him aim, throw, and miss, both of us clutching our stomachs in laughter as we fell to the grass. The late afternoon sun felt warm on my face like a well-dried wool blanket. Occasionally, a few parents' curious eyes would pass by. I'd respond with a faint smile. If they made up their own stories, that was their prerogative. I no longer had to clean up other people's conclusions. When I got home, I pinned the 4-branched family tree to the refrigerator next to the picture of Sophie's pancake birthday. The 2 pieces stood side by side like a bold sketch. Family is defined here. When the refrigerator door slammed shut, the magnet that said love sparkled, filling in the empty space. Late at night, while cleaning the kitchen, the phone vibrated. New email notification. Subject: from Andrew. The first time my brother contacted me since the failed lawsuit. I opened the letter. Only the subject line and the body was blank, as if someone had just wanted to say something and then stopped. I clicked away, not reading the details, but my heart was not troubled. It was like standing in front of the ocean and knowing that I was on the bow of a steady ship. Any wave would drift away. I turned off the light and went upstairs. Downstairs, the 4 figures were in shadow, but I could clearly see the red crayon Owen had used to color my hair. There were always people in life who wanted to add branches, break the boundaries, but I had learned to let my branches stand. Just enough leaves to catch the sun, just enough roots to embrace the ground, and enough love to not have to explain the missing part to anyone. The early May wind, carrying the scent of newly bloomed lilacs, crept through the wooden fence and into the kitchen like a regular visitor. I was pondering which potting soil would be best for my heirloom tomatoes when an email notification popped up on my screen. Subject: they want closure. Andrew. Brief, without exclamation marks, like a soft knock on a door where the person knocking is not sure whether to enter. I wiped my hands and opened the letter. Andrew wrote that his parents had realized things had gone too far and wanted closure before old age limited their chances of reunion. The apology was there, but it was vague. He didn't say they were wrong, just that they were sorry if I had been hurt. I read to the end, where Andrew offered some advice, maybe just a quiet lunch without mentioning the past. I wondered, did Andrew really see what I was going through? Did he see that a peaceful lunch would derail my and my children's efforts to rebuild their inner selves? In the end, he was still in the middle, the soft-spoken mailman, longing for peace but not ready to face the truth. I put my hands on the keyboard and typed slowly. Andrew, I appreciate your words. I wish you all well. But I'm building something else, and it doesn't lead back to the old version of family. Then hit send. No regrets, no joy, just the feeling that the window frame had been closed, unjammed. The backyard was a riot of daisies and a few tulips that Sophie had planted upside down earlier in the spring. Ethan hauled in organic soil, Owen dug holes with a plastic shovel, and I separated the tomato seedlings from the trays, each delicate but already green with eager green scent. The children's voices clamored for prettier whole, mingled with the buzz of bees. I squatted, my hands covered in dirt, listening to their laughter and finding myself laughing too. Laughter was abundant. When the last row was finished, Sophie sprayed water with a small watering can. The drops caught the sunlight and created tiny rainbows on the leaves, and Owen shouted magic and danced around. Ethan put his arm around my shoulder and whispered, "No other peaceful lunch, huh?" I nodded, feeling as light as a seed that had shed its old sap to sprout. Before dinner, I gathered the junk mail on the table, advertisements, flyers, a Mother's Day card from the insurance company. I picked it up, looked at the rose pattern, and thought briefly of the unopened, for the kids' letter in the drawer. I put the card in with it, but it didn't feel heavy. It was just a piece of paper, evidence of a closed story, not an invitation to a new chapter. I stood in front of the refrigerator where Owen's four-branched family tree and Sophie's pancake birthday photo, smiling cheekily, stood side by side like mirrors. The kitchen, which had seen many nights of dreaded text messages, was now a peaceful gallery. I took out a magnet and printed GRO put it up, right where the new tomato patch is. Default reminder, grow the way you choose. Late at night, the wind is chilly. I go out to the back porch to check the potted plants, feel the damp soil. Pigeons coo on the roof. The night sky is cloudless. I realize I don't want to go back to the path of negotiating friendship with conditions. I don't hold grudges, I simply won't turn back. The peace I maintain is not a passport for others to enter or exit. I whispered to the tree's shadow, peace does not mean permission. This sentence is not for anyone, but is deeply engraved in the roots. I turned away, locked the door, and let the night wind continue its business. They used to say they loved my brother's children more. I chose to love my own children, to love with both hands, without measure, without conditions. And with that love, I don't need to ask if it's enough, because enough is the feeling that blooms in the children's smiles and the smell of tomato leaves just touching the ground, the smell that promises to grow a little more tomorrow, regardless of who judges. Peace doesn't require the approval of others. It just requires a heart that firmly holds the door, open to the sun, closed to the storm. Hello, I am Monica, the narrator of the story for the past 16 chapters. Today, as I close that journey, I have drawn out a few small lessons that I would like to share with you, the one who patiently accompanied me until the end. What touched me the deepest were not the moments of conflict, but the moments I understood that family is not only where we are born, but first of all it must be a place of respect. When I dared to set boundaries to protect my child's peace, I realized that forgiveness and permission are two completely different things. Forgiveness frees the heart, but permission or not is the right of each of us. How about you? Have you ever had to say no to someone very close to you just to keep your own values intact? At that moment, how did you feel? Scared, guilty, or light? If this story reminds you of a personal memory, leave a comment, number 1, or a share below. I will read each comment, and who knows, your story may help someone else who is confused like me. If you love these heartwarming, everyday slices, don't forget to hit the like button, register channel, or follow the page so we can meet again on many more journeys. Your presence is the motivation for me to continue writing and telling. Thank you so much for listening, for empathizing, and for taking your precious time. May you always be brave enough to choose peace and gentle enough to keep that peace for the people you love. See you in the next story or in your own comments right below this video/article.